So, J. Ruud, what lovable book are we talking about today?
Well, Stacey Margaret Jones, I'll give you a hint. This book is dedicated to Edith Wharton.
Well, it must be Henry James. Or maybe, I don't know, I'll need more hints. All right, hint me.
Here's hint number 2. The City of Zenith.
Have I read it?
No, I don't think so.
Oh, okay, then I won't feel so embarrassed. What's the third hint? Maybe I'll know it even so.
Third hint is the Nobel Prize.
Something by Henry James, but I don't know.
Nope. Sorry. Oh. Bzz, wrong. I guess the Edith Wharton thing led you astray into Henry James, which is always going astray. This is a novel by Sinclair Lewis, America's first Nobel Prize winner, and the novel is called Babbitt.
Babbitt. All right. Well, welcome to Between the Covers, where we discuss one lovable book per episode. And apparently this week we're talking about Babbitt by Sinclair Lewis.
Yes. Would you like me to explain the Edith Wharton dedication?
Yes.
Because that's an incredibly interesting story.
Well, I knew when I was guessing Henry James that I didn't think he was probably nice enough to do that. So,
well, Sinclair Lewis probably wouldn't have been nice enough, actually. But here's what happened. In 1920, Sinclair Lewis had written his first book, Main Street, which is about the provincialism of a small town in America. And it was a kind of social satire. And the Pulitzer judging committee decided they wanted to give him the Pulitzer Prize for 1920. However, the Columbia University trustees of the award overruled them because the original description of the Pulitzer Prize for fiction said it should go to a book which shall best present the wholesome atmosphere of American life.
Oh, wow.
And the trustees at Columbia University decided that Main Street did not present the wholesome atmosphere of American life. And so they gave it to Edith Wharton instead for Age of Innocence. Lewis was pretty ticked, but he actually wrote to Edith Wharton, congratulated her, and said, I guess they decided my book was not wholesome enough. And she said, well, if they thought Age of Innocence was wholesome, I must have done something wrong. So Sinclair Lewis's next book was Babbitt, which he wrote in 1922, and he dedicated it to Edith Wharton.
Interesting.
Because of that. And interestingly, the committee wanted to give Babbitt the Pulitzer Prize for 1922, but Babbitt is even more scathingly satirical than Main Street was. And the Columbia University trustees said, no way. And so the jury recommended Willa Cather's One of Ours, but they said they recommended it without enthusiasm.
Wow.
But the trustees gave her the award anyway. And then in 1926, Lewis wrote a book called Aerosmith, which was unanimously recommended by the jury for the Pulitzer Prize. And since that one was not so satirical,
then he got his Pulitzer.
The trustees decided they would let him have that award, but he turned it down.
Yeah, okay.
And he wrote a letter, an open letter, which appeared in newspapers across the country as to why he was turning it down. And what he said was, specifically referring to the wholesome atmosphere phrase, this phrase, if it means anything whatever, would appear to mean that the appraisal of the novels shall be made not according to their actual literary merit, but in obedience to whatever code of good form may chance to be popular at the moment.
I think they've dropped that from the Pulitzer criteria.
Yeah, they did, mainly because of him.
All right.
4 years later, he was awarded the Nobel Prize.
Oh, there you go.
And he accepted that one. Right. He didn't mention the controversy about the Pulitzer in his Nobel speech, but he did kind of allude to it. He said, I believe Strindberg rarely sang the Star-Spangled Banner or addressed Rotary clubs. Yet Sweden seems to have survived him.
Well, that was some prize politics digression there, but that is very interesting.
Yeah, I couldn't resist
I could
throwing
see
that in immediately.
I am curious about one thing I've always heard, that it's pronounced Pulitzer, and you seem to say Pulitzer. So I'm
may
just
just
wondering.
be my ignorance.
It may be mine. Anyway, we'd love to hear from people who know how you're supposed to say it. So to follow up that, let's talk a little bit about the down and dirty summary.
Well, here's a good way to do that, I think. Since I've already talked about the Nobel Prize, the Nobel Committee essentially gave him the award with Babbitt in mind. And in their announcement of giving the award to Lewis, they cited the protagonist of the novel, George F. Babbitt, as, quote, the ideal of an American popular hero of the middle class. The relativity of business morals as well as private rules of conduct is for him an accepted article of faith, and without hesitation he considers it God's purpose that man should work, increase his income, and enjoy modern improvements. So basically, the satire at the heart of the novel is the satire of the American businessman.
Oh, okay.
Who believes in conspicuous consumption as the goal of life, that business is the only thing we should be considered. In 1920, there was a presidential election, and the novel is set in 1920.
When did it come out?
1922.
Okay.
And Babbitt is interested in the upcoming election. He says, what we need is a business administration. We need a country that's run on sound business principles.
Well,
and so Warren Harding was elected. And the rest is history, but not very happy history.
We still have that thinking in America today.
We do indeed.
That our government should be run like a business, and it's not efficient like business. You shouldn't do it that way, et cetera, et cetera. So
yeah, there's a lot of Babbitt still around.
Yeah.
Critics of the novel, when it came out, one of the things they complained about was that there was no plot.
I was going to say, is it picaresque or
rambling.
episodic, or
it's kind of episodic. I mean, I think there's a fairly obvious arc in what happens to Babbitt. He's extremely self-satisfied in the beginning, and the first 7 chapters are all about a day in his life.
Oh, okay.
So it starts at breakfast, and he's talking to his kids, and his daughter, he says, has these socialist ideas, and he's chiding her, and his son doesn't have much gumption, doesn't have much ambition to do anything. So he's got problems there. He's a realtor, and he runs a very successful realty office and makes a lot of money that way. But even before he wakes up that morning, he's having a dream. And in the dream, there's a fairy princess, and he's looking for her and he can't reach her. It's a symbol of the fact that he really knows that he's missing something, that he's missing something beautiful, and he just doesn't know what it is exactly. What happens that turns him around kind of in the book is he has a college friend named Paul Reiser that he has lunch with that first day. And Paul is talking about how unsatisfied he is with his life and with his wife and how he wishes that he could just get away sometimes. And they decide they're going to go to Maine together on a hunting, fishing trip, which works for a little while. But about the middle of the book, Paul shoots his wife and goes to jail. And it's right at the peak of Babbitt's own kind of social status when he's elected vice president of the Boosters Club for the city of Zenith. He's so excited about that. And then he gets home and finds out Paul shot his wife and is in jail. And this kind of throws him into a skid.
Sure.
And he starts doing, his wife and kids go out of town for a few weeks, and he just kind of goes off the rails. He becomes, he has an affair with a woman. He gets drunk all the time. He even talks to this guy that had run for mayor, and he made a lot of speeches against him because he was a socialist. And he thinks about this guy, and he goes and talks to him and gets to kind of understand where he's coming from. And there's even a scene a little later where there's a strike in town, and all the businessmen, of course, think these people should be shot. And he says to his wife, do you think that people would think I was crazy if I said that I think these people are all right? And she said, yes, but I know you wouldn't mean it.
Oh, so are we still in the down and dirty summary, or
that was my summary, basically.
Okay.
I won't tell you what happens in the end.
No, don't. Please don't. How long is the book?
Not terribly long. I actually don't know the page numbers because I listened to it as an audiobook.
So it's interesting because he and Wharton were corresponding.
Yeah.
So they were contemporaries.
Yeah.
And they deal with some similar themes because she writes about the Gilded Age, which is a time of conspicuous consumption and that kind of social climbing and people realizing their worth through their bank account. And although with Old New York, there's also a kind of quasi-royalty or aristocracy.
Yeah. And in Zenith, there isn't.
Right.
Zenith is an imaginary town, but it's in the Midwest. It's supposed to be a city of between 200 and 400,000 people. And when the book came out, Indianapolis, Milwaukee, Minneapolis, Kansas City, and Cincinnati were all thought to be, oh, this must be Zenith.
Right.
And Lewis never said whether it was one or the other. He seemed to think that all American cities were about the same. Yeah. Because they did the same things and they looked the same and they had the same kind of Babbitts in them.
Who else thinks this book is lovable? Or who else likes this book, or aside from the Pulitzer drama?
Well, there is that.
And the Nobel Prize Committee.
There is the Nobel Prize Committee. You don't find it on a lot of these lists. It is on the Guardian's list of the greatest English language novels, but that's the only one of the ones I usually look at that it was on. Okay. And Lewis is he's not the big deal that he was in the 20s and in 1930. He was the first American to win the Nobel Prize, but he's been surpassed in popularity by his contemporaries, by Hemingway, Fitzgerald, Faulkner, Steinbeck, who would have been a much younger contemporary, but still a contemporary. So people don't read him that much these days, which is a shame because Babbitt, Main Street, Aerosmith, Elmer Gantry, which is
that's a movie.
It was made in a movie in 1960 with Burt Lancaster, and it's about it's again a satire, but it's about an evangelical preacher and how he basically is scamming everybody.
So was it only on the Guardian list, or? That
was the only one of those lists that I usually look at. Okay. But some of his other books are on other lists. So, I mean, it was picking one of his books that was the trick. And
so did you read all of his books?
Not all of them. I have read Aerosmith and Main Street. One of his books was very popular recently, and that was It Can't Happen Here, which he wrote in 1936. And it's a novel about a sort of populist politician who gets elected and institutes a fascist dictatorship in the United States. And it was popular in the aftermath of the 2016 election for some reason. But other than that, I don't think a lot of people read him much anymore.
So what is lovable about Babbitt? I mean, why is this on your list of lovable books pulled from all those lists of all those worthy contenders?
I think it's lovable. I mean, it's not cuddly lovable, but it's lovable for the reasons that the Nobel Committee found it lovable, that it's an excellent and brilliant satire of a man who his name actually becomes synonymous with the sort of person that he is. Right. This kind of self-satisfied but sort of blind chauvinism. You hear that. Known as Babbitry.
Yes, I've heard that expression.
J.R.R. Tolkien is thought to have coined the word hobbit from Babbitt. You think of the hobbits, you think of Frodo and Bilbo and Sam and Merry and Pippin.
Right, who go on
adventures.
And save Middle-earth.
Yeah, but they are the exception.
Right. Hobbits don't go anywhere.
Hobbits don't go anywhere. Hobbits don't have adventures. Hobbits are very satisfied in their own little holes in the ground.
They want to stay in their hole in the ground.
Yeah.
Oh, that's interesting.
Probably even closer similarity is John Updike's Rabbit Run and its sequels.
I was thinking of those.
Rabbit is basically Babbitt.
Right.
And he's he's a businessman. But he has a kind of life crisis.
Yeah, I've read some of those.
And that's what happens to Babbitt in this novel. So there's a direct influence of Sinclair Lewis on John Updike.
Do you feel like the satirical writing of 100 years ago is accessible or packs the same punch for, 21st century readers?
Well, let me read you a couple of excerpts and see if you think.
Okay.
Babbitt, early in the book, before he has his sort of awakening, which is his midlife crisis, basically. I mean, the book's written so that he's the focus. He's not the narrator, but you're in his mind. Right. And a lot of the times he's thinking about politics or society. And as to industrial conditions, however, Babbitt had thought a great deal, and his opinions may be coordinated as follows. A good labor union is of value because it keeps out radical unions, which would destroy property. No one ought to be forced to belong to a union, however. All labor agitators who try to force men to join a union should be hanged. In fact, just between ourselves, there oughtn't to be any unions allowed at all. And as it's the best way of fighting the unions, every businessman ought to belong to an employers' association and to the Chamber of Commerce. In union, there is strength. So any selfish hog who doesn't join the Chamber of Commerce ought to be forced to. It's hilarious because he's so vehement, and it's so obvious how hypocritical he is.
Yeah,
nobody should be forced to join a union. You should be forced to join the Chamber of Commerce.
Right, except the union I want you to be in.
That's right.
Right.
And that's the kind of thing you get in the book where you can see the irony of a lot of his opinions.
Yeah.
When he goes to Maine with his friend Paul, and they're on the train, they meet all these other traveling salesmen, and they all are puppets of each other. They mirror each other. And when they're talking, the men leaned back on their heels, put their hands in their trouser pockets, and proclaimed their views with the booming profundity of a prosperous male repeating a thoroughly hackneyed statement about a matter of which he knows nothing whatever.
Awesome. The overconfident.
Yeah.
Yes.
So I think people reading it today would certainly laugh just as much as they did then.
Is he responding to something specific in American culture at the time? I mean, Wharton was kind of recreating the era of her childhood, that milieu, the things that had already, by the time she was an adult, fallen away some. But she was still addressing very contemporary feelings and things in the zeitgeist, so to speak. What is he responding to anything in particular, or he's just looking around at America and saying, America, you're happening to yourself?
Yeah. I mean, I don't think there's a single particular thing that he's responding to, but this is the zeitgeist of the time that he's responding to. Mm-hmm. This is 1920. The World War I has just ended. All the great industrial countries of the world are in tatters. The only one that's not is America. Mm-hmm. America, therefore, has the greatest economy in the world, is best suited to have the best military in the world. And so it's time to start getting out there and pushing America and Americanism.
Yeah.
And that's the attitude. There's also the Red Scare.
Sure.
People like Doane, that's the politician that ran for mayor, that he told everybody was a socialist. He's like one of these Reds, and the unions are, they got red agitators in them. So it's part of the general feeling of the time.
Right. And so this idea, the satirizing that business is the answer to all our problems, because probably there are people at the time, as there are now, who think that business is the answer.
Oh, yeah.
And that, owners of business are the answer to, they know what to do and we should do what they want and we should give them all these breaks. And I heard recently about American taxes that actually American tax law is very kind to owners or super owners. But if you are someone who is an attorney or a physician and you work for somebody else and you make a lot of money, you're going to pay a lot of taxes. But if you own something, there are lots of ways not to pay many taxes. Mm-hmm. And it's interesting because it's, that didn't just happen, right? It's a product of our value system as a nation.
Yeah. And the value system as a nation is what he satirizes throughout.
Right. Are there
and it's not a system that makes people happy. If it did, then Paul wouldn't have shot his wife. Paul wouldn't be in jail.
Right.
And Babbitt wouldn't be having those dreams about the fairy princess that he wants to follow, and then he wakes up and then is back in his own world.
So the fairy princess, when you started talking about that, I actually wondered if it was just this idea of more. A lot of times in capitalism, it isn't more money, it's all the money.
Yeah.
And when you were talking about the fairy princess, I wondered, is the fairy princess emblematic of more or all? But you're saying, no, it's something else entirely that he doesn't have in his life, but he can't even really name it.
Yeah, I think that's what it is.
Okay.
Because otherwise, he pretty much has everything he wants.
Right. Well, that's not the point though, is it?
No.
So what might not be lovable about this book, or why might people not love it?
There were a lot of people that didn't love it, particularly the trustees of the Pulitzer or Pulitzer
duly noted
prize, because it was making fun of things that people valued, and he was a rabble rouser. The one really vocal defender he had was somebody that was even more cynical than he was, and that was H.L. Mencken. Mm. And Mencken wrote an article called Portrait of an American Citizen, in which he said, "It is not what Babbitt feels and aspires that moves him primarily. It is what the folks about him think of him. His politics is communal politics, mob politics, herd politics. His religion is a public right wholly without subjective significance." People didn't like him because they wanted to be him, and to point out that wasn't the way people ought to be was probably very distressing to some people.
Right. So how you're taking the thing that I strive for and saying it shouldn't be something anyone strives for.
Yeah.
Because it's empty. There's no reason for living within that, at the soul of that or the heart of that.
Yeah.
Okay. Any other reasons people might not want to pick this one up?
I think that's the main reason.
Okay. So you feel like it isn't read as dated.
I didn't. It was astonishingly contemporary.
Okay, great. Well, that's good to know.
Considering that it had been written in 1920.
All right, got to get
22.
Yeah, in touch with Babbitt. Then it's interesting that he could look at America and kind of pull this figure out to embody these issues that we still dance with.
Yeah,
today.
You would think that you wouldn't like Babbitt, but I felt for him.
Yeah, it sounds like
his surface was this kind of hard, confidence, but he's got that inward longing for something that's beautiful, for something that means something.
Yeah.
And when he does kind of break out, when he has his crisis, he tries to find this other places. He's not real successful.
Well, don't.
And of course, obviously, his friend Paul is even less successful.
Well, at least he didn't pull a Paul as far as you've led us through the novel. So what number is this on your list? We're not going to go through all the books every week anymore, but where are you putting this on the list? Between what books, or at what number so far?
Oh, I think I'll put this in number 9.
Okay. So what's ahead of it and what's...
So behind, I think I put Moby Dick as number 8 last time, or when we did Moby Dick. Okay. So I think he's after Moby Dick.
Oh, okay. So last on the current list.
So far, yeah.
So far. Okay.
But there will be some that'll go
That's
after
great
him.
to know. And Catch-22 is still number one.
Still number one.
All right. Okay. Well, anything else you want to add on Babbitt?
I don't think so.
Had you read it before you listened to it?
No.
Oh, okay.
But I listened to it, and then I listened to it again like a year or 2 years later.
Oh, wow. Okay.
So
really dedicated.
So I went back to it.
Okay.
I think it's worth going back to.
I suppose it might. I mean, that's one thing you get out of a literary novel that you're not going to get out of something that's completely enjoyable, but what you might call plain fiction. That you read it once, you know what happens. If you reread it, it's just because you know what happens and you enjoy it. Whereas a literary text is richer in that every time you come back to it, you're going to get more out of it because you've lived more life and you've been exposed to new things. And the novel becomes richer because you see more in it because of your increased understanding of the world.
And sometimes just because even if it's only been 2 years since you read it, you remember it and want to think more about some things that happened in it.
Yeah, that's wonderful. All right.
So I think it probably is about time for Chaos Reader.
It is. And I would like to take this opportunity to announce that I have finished the LBJ biography.
Woohoo.
I think it took me 4 months, maybe. Yeah, something like that. And it was really good. And I highly recommend. It's by Randall Woods, LBJ. But I digress because this week, the Chaos Reader, I want to talk about Frankenstein by Mary Shelley, which we are reading aloud. Frankenstein. And poor Mary Shelley, because the movie, what movie is it?
Well,
what is the movie that we're quoting all the time when we're reading this?
Oh, that's Young Frankenstein.
Okay, Young Frankenstein is kind of muscling her out of my consciousness, even as I'm reading her book aloud. But I'm not enjoying it maybe as much as I thought I would. But I'm very eager to get to the end. I think it might be one of those books that you read it the first time through to see what happens, and then you read it again to understand what happens more. And we're reading it aloud, and you read aloud a lot to me when we drove to Nashville this weekend, and sometimes I don't get as much out of it when I'm not seeing the words.
Despite the fact that I am reading?
Well, I mean, you do a wonderful job, and especially with the Frankenstein. But it is very good. And you know what is really fascinating is going to the source material. And that before this book, there was nothing like that in our consciousness, right? She made up this idea in order to explore other ideas. And we're still exploring those ideas, like in Ishiguro and Ian McEwan novels, where they explore what does it mean to be human or have a soul, or, you know, how do we treat each other? And it's fascinating.
What
it is
strikes
fascinating.
me in particular about Frankenstein is how little it is like the Boris Karloff movie that made it famous. Almost nothing like it.
I'm really having to get used to what the novel is instead of what I thought it would be. Yeah. But I will say it's not fair to say, but it reminds me of Isaac Dinesen. Obviously, Dinesen wrote after Shelley, but I read her first. So that's the code for me. And it's a Gothic story.
Yeah.
And it's this frame story, you know, a story within a story within a story. And Dinesen also takes on really big ideas in these kind of spooky, strange stories. And then you finish the story and you're like, oh my goodness, I can't even think about everything in that short story. There's so many ideas. And Frankenstein does remind me of that. So I'm enjoying it. But I'm reserving judgment till the end.
All right. Which is always a good idea.
All right.
So we should say hello to our listeners. We have new listeners in Estonia,
which is lovely because we have been to that lovely country and we really would like to go back. So maybe we can come to Estonia and have a live event. So
Yeah, sure. If you're out there, Estonians, just invite us.
We'll be
pop
right
on
over.
and we'll have a live event.
Yes, we
in
loved
Tallinn.
your beautiful country. So we'd also like to thank our producer extraordinaire, Jerry Bruno, for making this happen.
You're welcome.
And we will see you next week between the covers.
Between the covers. But I want to tell people that you might want to buy my new book, Treasure of Sherwood, which is one of the Robin Hood mysteries.
That's right.
But don't forget my awesome wife, Stacey Margaret Jones's book, Mr. Catherine, which is a domestic
Southern Gothic story.
Thriller with Jungian overtones.
That's right. And we'll see you next week.
Between
the covers.